All right, welcome back to another video. My name is Ian Major. I'm an entrepreneur, investor, and all-around raging capitalist. And in today's video, I'm doing a part 2 on the introduction to Austrian economics. If you haven't checked out my last video yet, be sure to go check it out. I will link it in the description down below. But in that video, we did the sort of part 1 to this introduction and went into some of the key foundational pillars behind Austrian economics, namely that value is subjective and really driven from the kind of additional utility that one gets from acquiring an incremental unit of a good, right? And so that's why if I have 100 pizzas already, the additional value that I would get from that extra pizza is going to be a lot less than the value I got from that first pizza, right? And so this is why the kind of price of that good isn't just necessarily the kind of amount of labor or effort that went into making it. This is also what helps solve what's called the paradox of value, namely, why is something like diamonds so much more expensive than water, which is unquestionably more important for the health of humans. How could it be? And also ultimately comes down to scarcity. We also saw how economic aggregates are really driven by individual human actors, acting in a kind of cause and effect relationship with reality. And so that sounds like a very basic idea, but it's quite incredible how modern economics really dismisses some of these kind of basic common sense tenets. We then saw how scarcity forces trade-offs in consumption versus investment. And really it's the scarcity of time, right? Human time is the most kind of scarce thing. And so there's always an opportunity cost at the very least of doing something, right? If I consume and buy a big screen TV, that means that I can't invest in a new business or some new kind of item that could improve my living standard even more. And so that ultimately landed us with this key implication that to drive additional economic growth, we have to invest more in the productive capacity of the economy. We have to be able to produce more goods and services, which makes humanity better off. And in order to do that, we have to forego consumption. Despite what modern economics would have you believe that you can have your cake and eat it too. So this is a very quick rundown and summary of the last video. Again, be sure to check it out. But in today's video, we're going to go the next step and talk about capital, interest rates as a coordinating price mechanism for the entire economy. And we'll also talk about the Austrian Business Cycle Theory, which is really crucial to understand some of the kind of booms and busts that we almost take as a matter of fact in modern economies today. So with that intro out of the way, let's go ahead and dive into the video. Okay, so let's start with capital, which is a crucial concept. Capital is basically the property, plant, equipment, resources that ultimately go into the production capacity of an economy. And so an easy way to think about this is an example I've used in a prior video around fishing. Imagine, myself and a friend, and we're both fishing for 8 hours a day with our bare hands, right? And let's say that we can produce, 10 fish in that amount of time. Now, that's all fine and good, but let's say that, there's others in the economy who are demanding fish, and, we want to be able to meet that demand with what we're doing. And so what I might do over the period of a couple days is instead of spending all 8 hours, fishing with my bare hands, maybe I actually only spend 4 of those hours fishing with my bare hands, and the other 4 I spend trying to craft some device, like a rod that will increase my productive capacity in the future. And so that's key, right? I have foregone the kind of consumption or being able to produce that same rate that I'm used to of fish in exchange for making something that will allow me to be even more productive in the future. And so once that rod is complete, I can come and basically produce twice the amount of fish, let's say, than my counterpart who's only fishing with his bare hands. And that additional productive capacity allows me to, in turn, spend more time investing in even more productive capacity. So let's think about a boat, right, which allows me to go out into the water and catch even more. And so, that's the idea, and you can quickly see how capital and the accumulation of capital is really what defines wealth in society. It's our ability to acquire goods and services at ever cheaper rates when compared to the time that it takes us humans to produce those goods and services. That is the definition of prosperity and wealth, and it's only possible with capital accumulation. And so equally crucially, capital has a structure to it, as articulated by Hayek, who's one of the famous Austrian economists, in his kind of Hayekian triangle. And so what this is showing is the unfolding of this kind of broader process. We all go to the grocery store and that's kind of it. But think about all the stages of production that went into producing that ultimate final consumer good that you're purchasing at the grocery store. And so it could have started with mining of resources or that went into a refinement that went into manufacturing the cans that store the food that you're purchasing, which go into distribution, which go into wholesaling, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Here we are back on the excellent tweet thread by the great Peter Young, which again, I will link in the description below. And we can see how that structure of capital maps to the trade-off curve between consumption and investment that we were talking about in the last video. And so on this graph on the right, the idea here is that you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't simultaneously use all your savings to go buy a bunch of big screen TVs and simultaneously use those savings to invest in some productive project like, crafting that fishing rod or making that boat to increase the productive capacity of society. And so what happens is that as savings increase, that essentially allows us to lengthen the structure of capital and move us along the curve towards more investment. And so what we're doing there is moving the structure of capital towards early stage production and projects, which are ultimately going to lead to more economic growth via the higher productive capacity, right? Now, in a free market, this whole kind of song and dance is coordinated through interest rates. And so as savings increase and we have the ability to invest in more projects and boost productive capacity, those savings start to get depleted into those projects. And as that happens, as savings goes down, interest rates then rise to kind of slow things down a bit and re-attract savings to earn those higher interest rates. And so you have this kind of delicate balance that's being expertly coordinated by free market interest rates. But as most of us are keenly aware, we have nothing even remotely resembling the free market when it comes to interest rates. In our current economic paradigm, the name of the game is for governments and central banks to print money anytime anything goes wrong, to try and smooth out and stabilize the economy, when in fact it just pushes these dislocations and distortions further into the future. And so each crash becomes worse, and the response to that crash becomes even more emphatic in terms of money printing, monetizing debt, yield curve control, depending on the market we're talking about. And so we'll talk through the mechanics, but I first want to just present this fascinating case study around the two depressions that happened in the US in the 1920s. And yes, I said two depressions. So everyone knows the Great Depression, but most folks forget the depression that happened right at the beginning of the decade. And so the Federal Reserve, central bank in the US, was created in 1913. And between then and 1920, they came out of the gate swinging by increasing the money supply by 100%, so doubling the money supply in a few short years. Absolutely astonishing. And so that naturally created a massive boom in economic activity, which was unsustainable and led to a bust in 1920. Surprisingly enough, the government really didn't do much of anything in response to that crash. And so while the recession ensuing after that was severe, it was quite short-lived. And so 18 months later, again, that sounds like a very long time in today's speak, where government comes in bigger and faster every time. The economy had kind of fully recovered. Unfortunately, from that point until 1929, the central bank, stayed swinging and increased the money supply by a further 63%. So whopping supply increase there. And of course, as we're all familiar, that led to this boom, not just in stocks, but also home prices, etc. And ultimately, that resulted in an inevitable bust. And this time around, the government really pulled every tool out of the toolkit. You had bailouts, you had actual price controls, you had nationalization, banks, you had massive spending projects. You had the end of really the end of the kind of gold standard fully as we know it. I could do an entire video on all the different things that kind of went wrong, and ultimately this led to an extremely prolonged and devastating depression that we all know today, and the economy didn't recover for another 17 years. So let's start to now decompose and figure out why government intervention is the cause of these booms and busts, and should certainly not be the solution that resolves them. Okay, so we were just discussing how an increase in the supply of funds or an increase in savings ultimately lowers the rate of interest, right? Because there's more savings to go around and fuel different projects. And so folks and businesses and entities can borrow more cheaply because there is a bigger supply of funds. But what happens when governments intervene into manipulating interest rates? Let's say, for example, that the actual supply of real genuine savings is about here and would have the interest rate as such, but due to artificial manipulation and forcing interest rates down, what this actually does is it sends false signals to entrepreneurs and businesses in the economy. And it essentially incentivizes and encourages borrowing to go into different projects and create new kind of investments, when in reality there's not enough supply of real savings and capital needed to profitably complete those new projects. And so firstly, what this does to the structure of capital is it leads to malinvestments. So these are new projects which are started given this false signal that there is enough capital to profitably complete these projects. It would be kind of like building a house and thinking that you have enough bricks to build the house, because the market kind of sent this signal that there's enough supply of bricks. But when in reality, the time comes to build the house and you're 80% of the way through building the house, there actually weren't enough bricks to begin with. And now the price of bricks have gone up because everyone else is building houses given this false signal. And so the price of bricks has increased to a point at which you can no longer profitably complete the house. And so that is what's called a malinvestment. And so this is really what creates bubbles. Think of the housing bubble. The only way that an entire industry all at the same time can all kind of fall to pieces is if they've all made the same mistake due to this distortion in the market. And so that's malinvestment on the one hand, but then it also drives overconsumption on the other. And this further depletes the resources needed to support those investments. All right, gang. So there you have it. We'll go ahead and leave this video here for now. To recap, we went into the nature of capital and the capital structure, how that interacts with interest rates as this coordinating function of savings and investment in an economy. and how interventions and government manipulation and central planning around that crucial price that is interest rates ultimately creates malinvestments and distortions that lead to recessions and the boom bust cycle itself. And so I hope you enjoyed this content. If you did, give this video a like, subscribe. There's gonna be a lot more great content, both around Austrian economics as well as its connection to Bitcoin and all sorts of other Bitcoin related topics. So be sure to subscribe. And until next time, every sat counts as always. I'll see you in the next one.